And Madison, I'm going to put you in charge to make sure that at least I'm sort of in frame. I'm going to keep sitting on this ridiculous table because I'm not going to sit in a chair. It'd be too convenient, right? Well, now that we have our greetings out of the way, am I good on frame there?
Yes.
Wow, look at me go. It's like I've done it before or something. Brief synopsis of me. Did that, my role in the organization. Oh, so the things I didn't tell you is that I founded the church 2 years ago. There's only 3 of us running the whole shebang. Our intention, what we saw as an initial issue was that we first thought we were going to go and find a whole bunch of covens. Then we saw a whole bunch of issues with covens, how they're organized, and some of the trials and tribulations that they had. And then we moved more to realizing that we need to talk more about how and why. So why does a coven exist? How does a coven exist? And instead aim towards education instead, and talking about and helping people form their own covens, their own groups, if they should so wish, as well as supporting individuals. So my title, it says it on the front paper, is Hierophant. Don't worry about it. Yes, I'm the head of the church. No, don't worry about it. My title's not important. It's mostly just for playing the American game, because we're working on becoming a charity and organized that way, and working on grants and stuff to continue to help the community. So we had to play the game. That's how we ended up here. We have an ordination, so the other 2 that are currently with me, the 2 cardinals, are Joe and Marisha, and they were ordained December 19th last year, actually. And they'll float in and out, you'll see them, they're on our website, you can find us churchofwitchcraft.org. You can look at that, we're always open for emails and conversations. I'm surprised I actually did most of this. Non-denominational presentation, I'm pretty sure you're clear on that. Okay, so getting into the meat of this. So in witchcraft, what I've seen the primary of is that there's a lack of grace. Now grace, I'm not talking about in the divine God sense. And by all means, you can feel free to just chime in if you want to, if you have things to say. So an absence of grace to me is a lack of artfulness in witchcraft. So when I'm talking about grace specifically, I'm looking at the artfulness of craft, right? Instead of the deity-driven version, right? With all witches, there seems to be a lack of application. I'm not saying that each individual person, everybody's failing or whatever, but what I'm saying is that the intention behind what you're doing, you find a spell or you find some other method or you find a resource outside of yourself, and then you execute that thing. But the question comes, why are you doing that? What is the purpose of you doing that? Where is your joining of that particular facet, right? So I'm designing spells, right? So I'm looking at how to do that, and I'm looking at poetry, I'm looking at, various traditions, and getting an idea and a sense of imbuing myself into that spell, instead of just using spells. It's a great place to start. Please, by all means, do that. It's really helpful. But putting yourself into that magic is part of the whole gig, right? Especially for witches. I see a lot of people not involving themselves in their own craft, in other people's craft. We talk a lot about ritual, right? So a lot of covens will bring people and they go, all right, how are we gonna get more members? Let's all do a ritual. In my opinion, there's several orders of difficulties with this, right? You have all of the media baggage that comes with this, all the Harry Potter stuff, all the stuff, right? And you tell people we're gonna go run rituals. They come in with all this baggage, but we need to have earlier conversations that are way more approachable, that aren't about a specific tradition or trying to get you to practice a certain way and presenting more of it. And the artfulness of that is imbued within this own conversation, within this presentation itself, is an artful presentation. I also see in just beyond witchcraft, I also see a lot of ugliness in our own world. Obviously, we're all aware of Ukraine, right? Okay, not super great. Those are pretty terrible things that are happening over there. And there's a lot, not just that, but just ugliness in general in our world, how people present themselves or how they come to a situation, how they present themselves to the world. And it's not just about presenting themselves to the world, it's also how they present themselves to themselves. And there's a missing component there, and that ugliness goes further, right? So if you're not taking care of yourself and you're not presenting yourself in a way that you appreciate, it's gonna be really hard to do some really cool magic stuff, right? So when I see people in cloaks and things and they're running around with that, please do so. I mean, because that is part of that magic that you're bringing. That's the artfulness. Now, one person might say, you look ridiculous and you look like you walked off of a Harry Potter set. Sure, but it's not their problem, right? This is your path and your artfulness and how you're expressing the craft. I look like this literally all the time. I go to work like this. And I didn't initially because of a lot of different baggage and whatever, right? And I was like, you know what, I think I don't care anymore. And I just kind of skipped through that, so I presented in the way that I wanted to. And then I just was like, you can just kind of deal with it. And basically, nobody said anything. There was a bit of a hiccup. My boss showed up, because I showed up in a skirt to one of my work functions. And my boss came in and he's like, hey, and he was looking at me in the eyes, right? And then he looked down and he was like, hey, how's it going? And I was like, that's what I expected. And that's fine, right? I express this artfulness, this grace that is within my own craft, within my world, within my day-to-day interactions, and that is your own magic. So if people wonder, how do we incorporate magic into our lives? How do we do more witchcraft in our lives? Literally, how you present yourself, right? And how you present yourselves to others. The utility of grace brings about discipline. It can bring about respect. And there's a certain amount of sacredness as well as preciousness to this, right? The kernel of your own spark, your own magic, your own representation is precious. And it's so often quashed by the rest of the world and for a variety of reasons. And then to bolster that preciousness, discipline to, well, for example, just take me as an example, dressing this way, there's a certain amount of discipline that has to go into this. You have to maintain the clothing, you have to do all of that stuff, and there's a certain discipline that comes about with that. But also, when you're building spells or doing rituals or ceremonies, there's an artfulness presentation to that as well, and the consistency with that, whether that's a full moon ritual or dark moon or new moon or whatever it is you're doing, there's a consistency and a discipline to that in that artful execution. So bringing that is part of the artfulness of craft. There's a certain amount of respect too that goes with this, not just primarily for yourself, the self-respect that you gain from living in that space, living in that disciplined space, and seeing the effects of your magic in the world. You can track it, you can see it, you can watch the changes as they move about in your world. And that is the respect that you're gaining, the self-respect for you. As you gain more respect for yourself, I'm sure this is pretty obvious to everybody else, people want to be around you because they want what you have and they can't figure out how to get there, right? Ergo, this conversation, and I organize this because of that reason. A lot of people want to either listen or be around or emulate, and that happens frequently, and I'm flattered by that. And that is part of my own artful implementation, because my example is the inspiration to others to act artfully as well. Not mimicking me, not trying to replicate what I do, but doing what they are for themselves. What is grace? And we kind of touched on this a little bit. Grace is not necessarily a divine-driven thing. I mean, we can get into a very long conversation, and we'll have more of those later, about divinity, because what is divine, right? Is it you? Is it something external to you? Are we just profane creatures, or are we sacred in and of ourselves? And we can debate that forever from various philosophy perspectives. In this instance, we're just define grace. Lexicons are really important. How we talk, what we speak of. For example, what's a spell? Curse, hex, jinx, charm, enchantment. What are these things? Do we use them interchangeably? Knowing what we're speaking about, again, the artfulness, brings respect to your craft, respect to yourself, respect to others in your community. Grace originated from the Latin word, and I'm going to slaughter this because Latin's not in my head, because I'm learning French. Latin for gratia or gratia. It means favor, kindness, or esteem. It is also from a root word of gratius, or pleasing. And so this is going to become a theme as we see further on in this conversation. There's an elegance in beauty, an elegance of beauty in grace, in your form, manner, emotion, and action, right? Instead of just acting jittery all the time and running around from one thing to the other with no plan whatsoever, you go with intent. And what do we need? Does anybody know what we need intent for?
To make the spell work.
Yes, spell work, manifestation. Yes, intent. And grace is building that intent, is the consistency of developing that intent and knowing how to do that. Because then it's going to come into your spell work and into your craft. Again, how do we put more witchcraft into our lives? With more grace, because it brings that intent. In form and in manner, how you interact with people. How many vulgarities do you use? what kind of words you're telling people, what things you say to yourself, how much do you berate yourselves? Oh, that was a stupid choice. Why did I do that? How often do you hear yourselves talking about that? And being aware of that, again, teaching yourself that intent. Notice this is not the church teaching you how to do this. It's not me teaching you how to do this. You're informing yourself of your own, how you're talking and treating to yourself, right? How you talk to yourself, if you wouldn't talk to other people how you talk to yourself, you might want to have a conversation with yourself. It's kind of important. And in motion is not just, we're in motion for always. I don't know when we stop, I guess when we're deceased, but even then there's still motion. You know, your nose and ears still grow, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens. I'm not sure if we ever stop moving. I guess until we get desiccated. I guess until we run out of corporeal form, then I guess we're done. But then things take us and moves around, and then we're still moving, right? Is it a perpetual motion machine? I'm not sure. But motion, again, is with that intent, the mannerism that you're going to do things with. I see, there's a lot of tangents I can go on, which is why I have no cards to rein myself in. I talk, one thing that I've noticed, so I work in behavioral therapy, and this has taught me to look for things. I came across a distinction of prey versus predator. A lot of people move like prey, not many people move like a predator. What I mean by that is that the prey tends to move super jittery. They jump from place to place, they start in one place and they walk as fast as they can to another area. They try to get from point A to point B as quick as possible. They're not paying attention to their environment. They're just scared and frenetic all the time. Whereas a predator tends to, that kind of behavior or that motion tends to be, they'll just sit in the middle of a room. I mean, imagine that. Could you imagine instead of sitting on the corner of a room, cough, cough, everybody almost in this room, you know, sitting in the center of the room, even if it's just by yourself. Imagine the feel it might be like someday, find an empty room or whatever, just sit in the center of it. Don't worry about the door, don't worry about the windows, just look away from the door, turn away from the door and look at a wall. That's kind of alarming, right? We like to see windows and exits and doors and be protected and safe, and this is that same kind of prey mentality. And that prey mentality is not putting you in a place of control of your own life, which doesn't put you in control of your mannerisms, which doesn't put you in charge of your emotion, which doesn't give you the intent, and you see the kind of cascade effect here. And in action, I mean, you can take this a lot of different ways. How you do things, how you enact things, what you start, what you don't start, what you do, what you say, are all part of your actions. And being mindful of those is very important. The other part of grace is being pleasing or attractive quality or endowment. Attractive quality is what I would like to focus on there. Attractive quality is, what do you want to attract? How do you want to represent witchcraft? When other people say, when you tell people, I'm a witch, right? What do you want them to see? What kind of qualities do you want them to do? I want them to see confidence. I want them to see assuredness, a leadership role, or at least certainty in myself, at the very least, right? And also buying that this is it's growing, right? There's been plenty of witches forever, right? We had the satanic panic back in the 80s. We're seeing some of the, echoes of that now. And so how do we want to represent? Specifically, when I'm talking, there's a very specific event right now where people are busy cursing or hexing or doing subtractive baneful magic for Russia, right? So when the witches all come out of the woodwork and start doing things, what do the public see? They see a bunch of angry people lashing out. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. What I'm saying is just that look at the perception of what we're putting out there collectively. Versus, why is nobody saying, hey, let's go ahead and support the opposite side? What if we did a whole bunch of spells? Or maybe the Russians that are against this effort, right? Why don't we have support there? And that's the kind of actions that I'm talking about. You can come up with plenty of these as well on your own, and I encourage that. Let's see here. Grace in theology. So theology is freely given and unrestricted favor and love of God. So in religion and that sort of thing, the divine is this freely given grace that they're bestowing this on a profane creature to make them more sacred, a la Durkheim. So Emil Durkheim, behaviorist, he basically says that all the things that are religious are stemming from human action. Human interaction is what makes things, so a sacred stone, right? If we just pick a pebble or if we pick a random chair and here we go, that's the holy chair. Our collective action makes that chair holy. It is not necessarily a divine given thing, right? But in theology, they speak of freely given and unsolicited favor and love from God. It's an influence of God that is operating in humans to regenerate or strengthen. So petitioning, praying, right? Looking at, please give me the strength to do this. Renew me, make me more sacred, make me more divine. But I think that all the witches here kind of have an idea. You already have that in you. I don't need that to be bestowed for something else. It can be assisted. You can work with a neat pantheon or deity if you want to, or spirit, and I think that it can assist. Is it necessary? I don't think so. But it does take a lot of strength of character to be able to stand in your own power and go, I give myself my divinity. I recognize my divinity. That's a way different thing. Also, it talks about a virtue or excellence of divine origin. This can go, the Greeks, ancient Greeks, things were motivated by that which is perfect. Let's go to Ptolemy. Ptolemy talked about epicycles, so meaning things, everything moved in concentric circles that were super perfect because they emulated the divine. And then when people were like, hey, by the way, things don't move in circles, they move in ellipses, everybody freaked out because they were like, that's not a divine thing, it's not perfect. And so virtue or excellence of divine origin in that particular manner is talking about all of the things that we emulate, our paintings, our clothes, our music, is for that virtue or excellence, trying to imitate that which is divine, or in this instance, God or whatever pantheon you're working with. Again, this links back to your actions, right? How are you taking that same thing? So if you have a deity that you work with, are you trying to mimic or emulate their divinity, their virtue or excellence, and use that as your own stepping stone, as an anchor to go, hey, this thing is perfect, this thing has this divinity, and I want to do more of that. So how do we get there? How do we do that? And that's why we talked about how witchcraft can be throughout the rest of your existence. How you move, how you talk, how you interact, we were just speaking of. It also lends moral strength. Moral strength is the will to do, I would argue that it's basically the will to do what you think is the best action to take with relation to everybody else that's around you. The moral strength to say, I'm actually going to help this person instead of not helping this person, and choosing that. And you can't help everybody. Sometimes you just have to let sleeping dogs lie. There are certain atrocities that you just aren't going to fix. You can't address it. And there's a limit to how much you can do. For example, if you don't like strip mining in Africa, well, then you just throw out all of your electronics and go live in the field, right? So we're just going to have to be okay with some of these things. Doesn't mean that we don't have to do anything about it, and we can at least try to limit some of the destruction that is wrought. Examples of grace, how it functions and why. Inspiration through grace, self and others, inspiring by example. And I touched on this a little bit prior. Good, I'm still on track, on time. They're pretty deaf on, like, you have to be out here at 6:30. And I'm just like, I'm just gonna keep going until they tell me, leave now. Inspiration through grace, self and others, inspiring by example. So the more that, here's an example. Joe, he sees how I represent myself and present myself to others. And he really liked my ridiculous hat. It's that hat. I mean, this thing is obscene. Yeah, like, who walks around with a hat like that? But what that has caused is that Joe said, I like your hat, I want my own. So he went and bought a fedora, and now he wears it around, and he wears it with more confidence, right? He's not getting my confidence, he's developing his own. Now, is the hat the only way they can do that? Absolutely not. Is it one way? Sure, because if you're walking around with a crazy hat on, like, be pretty confident in yourself. If you're gonna wear, Gandalf's hat, or a replica of that, and you're gonna go to a grocery store, go to a bank, and try to be taken seriously, it's really hard. Imagine trying to do an interview in a hat that Gandalf wears. You gotta be really confident and sell that, just ignore that the hat even exists at that point. And they can just go, is he aware? He's aware that he's got a pointed hat on? He looks crazy. And similarly, this looks crazy. I am well aware that most of what I'm wearing that people are like, what is happening? But it doesn't exist, it doesn't matter. It doesn't enter into the sphere of influence that matters, right? If I'm doing banking, what I'm wearing doesn't matter, right? Tom Baczynski, he's a distinguished professor at UCCS. I had listened to a lecture of his recently, and he had this whole theory about terror management theory. Terror management theory is not terrorism, but it's about how we respond to things that are frightening or scary and how we function, right? And I was sitting there thinking to myself, man, I look pretty intense, and I generally wear a lot of black, and I'm pretty tall. And I went, I kind of look like a symbol of death. Now, I didn't think about this until I had this, lecture, or watched this lecture of his, but the death symbology causes a reaction in people, either a proximal or immediate defense, right? I need to protect my life, because we don't want to die. We have a desire to continue, and so when things that are death symbols show up, we go, oh, I don't want that. I need to protect myself. But if my theory is correct, and I look more, and I inspire death symbology, then that changes the nature of every conversation I have, because they're all acting, at least in part, like defense, because they don't want to die. And at a very subconscious level, they're not thinking, oh my God, death has come for me. Like, that's not what they're thinking, but there's this big black shape in front of them that's fairly intense, and that causes reactions. And I hadn't even considered that, and I have no idea what this means for the greater portions of my life. But I'm really curious now if I represent that and what I elicit out of others as responses. And perhaps that's a way for me to cut through a lot of the nonsense from just like surfacey level sort of stuff that they talk about. They're important, but that way I can cut through and get more to the core of the philosophy, how they think, what they're doing, because they have to rely on things that make them them in defense of that perception of death symbology, right? Don't know. Kind of rhetorical question I'm exploring, right? Expressing values by embodying grace, mindfulness, awareness, assisting witchcraft, sympathy, and empathy. We also touched on this a little bit, but the awareness that's assisting witchcraft, the more that you're aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you move, where you're going, who you're interacting with, how you're interacting, is the awareness that we need to observe effects of spells. Right? Because they're not generally immediate. We don't call down lightning usually, and it doesn't normally happen right then, right? I mean, if anybody in this room is able to call down lightning on that would be amazing. Please do it. I don't even care if you destroy the building. That would be shocking, and literally and metaphorically. But we need to pay attention. I don't really support the idea of spell babysitting. Is it working? Is it working? Is it working? Because they're just obsessing. But I pay attention, an example, I kept pulling the card for the devil in my tarot readings, barriers, obstructions, and that sort of thing. I was like, I'm really tired of this thing showing up. So I did a star dissolution spell. Long story, I can explain it later. To get rid of unnecessary boundaries. About 3 days later, I did another tarot reading, and sure enough, devil hasn't shown up in any of my readings. That's the kind of awareness I'm talking about, not did the boundaries go away? Also, other people sort of annex themselves from their life. They excuse themselves from, continuing conversations with me. Which also, unnecessary boundaries. They took care of themselves because of the work, right? But this is the observation, awareness in my action and mannerism. And that practice throughout my daily life makes me more aware to observe those kinds of changes. And because they're so slight, they can be very slight, and they have profound impact on your life. But if you miss them, what are we doing? I mean, all we do is observe things. Witches are basically keen observers, right? They originally started from some of the shamanic healing and that sort of thing, looking at herbs, and they were observing a bunch of what would happen. It's like, well, we gave him hemlock, and wow, this dude died. That was not good. We really didn't want that to happen. But now we know, right? But observing. It's a more obvious observation, but it brings that observation into mind. For sympathy and empathy, we're going to do an inversion of thought here. So when you look at somebody, when I look at somebody, I really try not to think, I'm going to pity this individual, right? Let's say there's a homeless individual who had a dog, and I looked at him and I didn't think, oh man, I'm so sorry for that guy. I didn't think that way. I was thinking about what things he was not able to access, and how can I bring that to him? What example can I give him, right? Sympathy is more of, man, they're missing something. And what better thing we do? We can give them, we can heal, which is heal. They give things and they prognosticate and they do divination. Again, the application. Why are we doing any of that? Okay, so yeah, you can do some shadow work with that. You can solve some of your own problems, but you can guide people, teach people, right? And not just through your tools, your occult technologies, the things like that do divination, prognostication, all that stuff. On my card, okay. I gotta keep going. Okay, something enough there. Actually, I'm gonna pause there because I'm halfway through. Any thoughts that anybody has, or anybody wants to share their thoughts about what we just kind of talked about?
Says the person who gets squirrels to crawl on his books.
Yeah, that's a thing. That's just, it's fine, it's normal. We have pictures of this.
It was awesome.
Poor Jinx, he was so like, is that her squirrel? And I'm like, no. I totally was.
The confidence within yourself, I've been looking into a lot of glamours and like, cause basically what glamours are is basically how do you want the other person to perceive you? Do you, and bringing those aspects to the surface either through makeup or through your clothing or through just looking at yourself in the mirror and being all like, I want my future boss to see me as confident and reliable. Bringing those to the surface so when they perceive you, they see those things. Yeah, no, true to all your points.
Just seeing it.
Yeah.
Any other ways? Even if they're not even necessarily related. Errant thoughts you might be having. Oh, scary. I know you're having some thoughts.
Well, I just thought about like putting your grace into it, like the difference between buying let's say like if it's a sword, buying than just a handle rather than crafting that handle to exactly fit your hand, like how deep your palm is, the individual width of your fingers, how deep they can set into the blade, and then how tightly you can grip that sword to to use it in the effective manner in which you want to use it.
Right. There's a different conversation when you make things unique to yourself like that.
And so it's like, how, you get as much out of it as you put into it. So it's
That's
that,
a good point.
it's that certain, I guess, like math about it, and how much you put in your personal touch into, the words you choose to put into your spell, or the specific amount of each herb you put into your potion, like she was saying about.
Exactly. No, it's all of those things. And that's awareness. If you take anything from this, the awareness of that is important. Anybody else?
So you mentioned vulgar language,
Mm.
and I know that in our society, vulgar can have a bunch of different meanings. And I've been really, really trying to not talk down about myself, that I've been better at. However, there is an F-bomb like in every sentence, usually with me.
Interesting. Okay.
And so I almost dropped one when I was introducing myself, and I caught it, and I'm glad I did.
Hey, look at you.
Um,
Looking at awareness.
But I don't know, I guess I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on that, just cussing in general, vulgar raunchiness in general. It's not necessarily malicious.
People that cuss can handle more pain.
That checks out.
It is an
Yeah.
actual, like, there's actual studies, like, if you cuss while you're in pain, you can endure more than people that are not allowed to cuss. So,
Right.
I mean,
I hear an ethically unsound experiment about to happen.
I
The
myself have
Mythbusters.
a very, very thick trucker mouth, I like to call it.
Oh, yeah.
The F word is my favorite,
I have a
to be honest.
and I have a terrible mouth.
Yes, see, I do try to be more mindful when there are children around, or you read the crowd and stuff,
I
but.
try real hard to be like, please don't make mommy. That's what I'm at.
I think it's more intention, like, you can say F this and it'd be okay, but if you say F you, that's intent, that's a direct store to there instead of just curse.
Yeah.
But
Literally.
can you go walk around, like I said, I don't do it maliciously, I try not to, I'm not perfect. But, I'm just trying to picture how being a graceful being while also saying every other word
Right.
go together.
Right.
And I want to be both, and so I wanted you to touch again on the whole vulgarness and how
Yeah.
that applies to grace.
You are, all people are fluid individuals, entities. Okay. Let's go with entities, that'll work. So be gentle with yourselves. Like, man, you're not gonna get this, none of us are gonna get this right first go, right? And there's things like, it's more in the attempt of doing so, about the intention awareness. If you wanna cuss, like that's fine. Where is it and how is it used is its own thing. I certainly use vulgar language. When I say vulgar, it also has an intent of So think back to how Latin used to be, right? Anything that wasn't Latin was the vulgar, right? And so it was vulgarities because it wasn't the high-born language that people were using to express the divinity in the Bible and songs and whatever. Also, it, sort of stymied everybody from being able to read it, and they could wield power over everybody by making it so that it wasn't available in understandable language for everybody. But that vulgarity has its own place. Certainly there's time to use it. It's more, like I said, the intent of minimizing some of those things and being more aware of your vocabulary choices and expanding on those things instead of hesitating in your language using fill-ins. You can use prettier language, more flourishes, for example, and expands your vocabulary, which brings more awareness to what you're doing. Because you have to think so much harder about it, because you have to think of unique words, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with cursing. I think you should totally do it. It's relevant. But if it starts making up your entire existence, are there better words you could use? Is there a better way you can express yourself? Because is that the best way that you can express yourself? If we're using just vulgarities, that's every other word. Are you expressing yourself the way that you want to? Is that the only way that you can express yourself? I would hazard to guess it's probably not. You probably have a lot more ways to express yourself. Wouldn't you want people to hear who you are and how you express yourself instead of the other way, right? Then I guess there's something to say, you can make a counter to that with what if it's that is the way you want to express yourself, go for it. Still the same intent. Even if you are using vulgarities all the time, if that's how you want to express yourself and you know why you're doing it, keep doing it. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Examples of grace continue. Becoming an artist through grace. Witchcraft artfully enacted. And we've kind of been touching on that with the vulgarity pieces as well. Practicing grace by artful witchcraft. Artful equals intent, right? The grace and art and kindness that you act with, or even anger or rage. I'm not a big, you only have to do light stuff. That's ridiculous. Don't do that. That is not my gig. Some of the members of my coven absolutely are love and light and purity. And I'm like, that's awesome. I'm not doing that all the time, right? There's some times that I want to. And vice versa. One of them has an oath that says that they can't actually do any baneful magic. Whole different paradigm. But people have their role specialization. They have certain functions that they do best, right? And I don't think that kindness is the only thing to do. For example, cursing the self. It's a kindness to yourself to eradicate things that you don't want. What a crazy concept, cursing yourself. Yikes. But it can be helpful. Artfully executing your witchcraft is meaning with that intent to all of things you do. How you write, how you hold your pen when you're doing that. Not just what direction you're sending it for what ritual or what deity you're pandering to or whatever it is you're doing, but how you step, how you walk, all of those things you're hearing the same thing over and over and over. That the art of witchcraft is imbued. That's why when people are like, how long have you been doing witchcraft? How am I supposed to answer that, right? How long have I been paying attention to this intent? I just didn't have the title or I hadn't adopted that role. Because in so adopting a role that is counter to your culture, witches work in a liminal space, right? There's a great quote, I'm going to absolutely slaughter this, but it's basically, witches are like the beetles and spiders in wainscoting. They derive their power from that which is liminal. So things that are the in-between spaces. And so adopting that title, you're working in an in-between space, an undefined space. And then how do you define that, right? If you're defining it with just a whole bunch of errant nonsense, it's just going, yep, they're doing something, are you really in the space of operating within that liminal phase? Maybe not so much. It's a great window into that. It's a good starting point. It's not all of it. A lot of witches I see get stuck kind of in that space of just, I'm going to borrow from different sources and I'm just going to take this title, but that means things, right? Any title that you take of any sort sets you in a certain reference point. Other people see you differently or operate. Take cancer patients. When you're bald and you shave all your hair off, you got stage 4, you walk around, people start looking at you a little differently because you're a death reminder. And that's scary, right? You have to take that title because it's obvious, right? Same thing with taking a title of witch, not as intense necessarily, but certainly there's a gravitas with which you're taking that. And then it's how you represent that, how you use that liminal space and why you use that, and how you do that with your internal self, your internal communities, as well as your external communities. Assisted witchcraft improves intentional engagement. Less chaos by extension. So when you're more intent and you're more artful in your execution of witchcraft, whatever that is, there's less chaos just by design because you know what you're doing, you know why you're doing it. And so there's less chaos, there's less factors that are going to come into the witchcraft to just cause all sorts of errant nonsense. Misdirected spells, misdirected intent, all of that stuff, right? It also quiets your mind a lot more during your waking hours because you're focused so intently on being artful that it's very hard to be distracted by, oh man, this person slighted me, or oh man, I don't have enough money, or oh man, that guy just cut me off. And thinking all those things, it's supplanted by all of that art that you're bringing into your craft. Because that's the intent that you're focusing on all the time. Arguably, is that not just a spell that you're doing all the time and feeding all the time? It's doing spell work all the time, right? And so that lack of chaos brings more of that intention and clarity of purpose and function and utility to witchcraft in general. Improving this clarity also removes your mental clutter, much like I was just saying. You know, there's a lot of that biz stuff. How many of us meditate? Raise your hands. Cool. How's meditation going for everybody? Not so great, right? Good for you? Okay. Is your mind clear? Are you empty? You're able to enter that big mind space?
It takes a lot of work.
Ah, see? How about for everybody else?
20, 30 minutes.
20, 30 minutes?
Breath work.
Cool. Are you able to get your mind quiet during that time and not have any of that other noise?
About 70% of the time.
That's pretty good, yeah. Well, that's about...
So, yeah, depending on the day, life events.
Right. Anybody else?
I actually think that one of my favorite types of meditation is the not necessarily, I mean, it does end up quieting the mind, but it's the leaf on the river path where it's, you know, hearing a thought, seeing it pass on a leaf and letting it go. And so it's not a quieting the mind and then getting upset that there's a thought and then, oh my gosh, I'm failing, it sucks and I'm doing such a bad job. And especially if you have ADHD, which, you know, has a tendency to run rampant and, you know, the
Gasp shock, I'm
I know,
surprised.
it's weird. But you know, the idea of it's okay, you know, like look, watch it go by. Oh look, watch it go by. And that meditation process of look, random thought, ooh, look, random thought is a very nice and helpful thing for at least me.
Yeah,
As someone with, you know, that kind of brain
of course.
and someone with constant distractions, it's a very nice version for me that I enjoy.
Confucians speak to self not so. Self not so is complex, but basically you are in self, but you are not so self, if that makes any sense. Basically you're in your own existence, your own experience, but you're not connected to all the rest of the stuff that's in an ego and your experience and all that stuff. It's just being in existence, and it's that quieting of the mind. And that, I mean, what do you have to do when you're doing spell work, when you're doing rituals and ceremonies and all that stuff, working with other people, working with other witches, internal, external communities? You need to have that clarity, that focus, that can be brought through that attention to your details. Because it's similar, here's the leaf and watch it go away, right? Here's this thing that's going to perturb my peace, right? I'm gonna let it go away, because I don't need to focus on that. What I'm focusing on is how I'm representing to myself primarily, and then outward from there. Oh, this card got really dense. Response and implementation. This is talking more of the, and then what? So now we have this information, how we can be artful in our application of witchcraft. How do you assist your community? What do you do for your community? Whether that's an external community, or just a smaller community like your family, or your coven, or your group of friends, right? Those communities also matter. And then how do you use graceful witchcraft? How do you be artful about witchcraft? Why do you do this, right? Kind of an open-ended question, more to have you think about. And this is also talking more about bringing up the assisted witchcraft application. Assisted witchcraft is all of that focus when you start bringing more of an intent to how am I going to help my community? What do I do for it? Because we all, solo practitioners, I started solo, right? Still do things solo sometimes. But what I started doing for my community, you guys showed up. This is what I'm doing for my community. This was the artful way that I was executing witchcraft, by bringing people together, by having these conversations, by endlessly obsessing over various sociological and anthropological sources to get an answer as to why we do community things, right? And so this is what I do with the community. I started the church for the community, right? So I'm looking at ways to enact that way. And how do you do that? What do you want to do? And it doesn't have to be grand. It can be simple. It can be a post on Facebook. It can be a helpful hand or helpful word to somebody. That is part of it. And they need to have that too, because there's so many people that are just, I mean, have you looked at Reddit Apprentice Witchcraft chat? Oh man, that is a mess. And that is just the wild west of witchcraft in there. Man, nobody is there looking for guidance and nobody's talking to them. I ran out of enough, I don't have enough energy, honestly, to go through all of that. You know, it's like, I guess how, does anybody remember the movie Bruce Almighty? Remember he got all the prayers, he freaked out and put it on autopilot and then like everything went way worse? Yeah, very similar situation at a very smaller threshold. I started looking at the Apprentice Witchcraft chat on Reddit and I was just like, I can't help all these people. There's absolutely no way for me to reach all of these things. I just don't have enough time. But I can bring that to everybody else's attention, and that is what I'm doing for the community, right? Maybe you get on Apprentice Witchcraft. Maybe you answer one person's question and give them some more insight, and then they can help somebody, right? We know this same kind of convoluted conversation, you smile at one person, they smile at another person, and then the kindness goes around, and then everybody's in love, right? That's how that works, I think. But similarly, how do you interface with the community? What do you do for them? Sympathy and empathy, referencing the grace and favor and kindness, esteem. The esteem you hold for others and not just for yourself, but also the kindness, the patience to have the conversation. For example, my value of kindness right now is to take the time out of my time to talk to all of you. And then you all took time to listen to me matter for some reason. You thought this was a great idea. But this is the kindness to hold that space for people, to be patient when they ask you the same question of, so I read Buckland's, big blue book, and it was awesome, and now I'm a witch. I'm like, you betcha. You killed it. Good job. Now, here look at some other things. But this is the kindness and patience for people who are just entering the craft, people who have been there forever, or people that have really dogmatic or tired views, gender-specific ones, where they just say, hey, only women can open circles. It's like, whoa, maybe we should have a conversation about that, instead of acting in anger and lashing out. This happens to me all the time, right? How can I lead a coven? Who can open a circle if there's no high priestess? Oh no. Well, there's possibilities, there's different conversations, that's a different talk. But it's the kindness and patience with those old dogmatic views that people might hold, that might try to hold that over you and define your witchcraft for you, right? This is why I present the way that I do, this kind of information, because I'm giving you a bunch of things to think about. Instead of telling you how to do it, I'm just giving you things to sort of assess in your own personality and then have a conversation about it. Maybe have it with a different person. Because those old tired gatekeepy stuff is just, there's no place. And witchcraft isn't going to flourish by any stretch of imagination if we're busy, saying you can't do this because you're not the right gender, you're not the right set of years, or whatever. And certainly those have their places. People who have a lot more information, they're kind of important because they know a lot more than you. They've been around, and you can listen and learn from them. Unless they're being super abusive and they're not being very helpful when they're telling you that you have to do it this way because it is the only way. The church is one way, but we are not the way. We should probably trademark that one. Disenfranchised people in a reeling society. How broken is society? Scale of 1 to 10, who thinks, let's get some numbers out here.
0.5.
10 being the greatest, broken society.
Oh, the 9.5.
9.5, okay. Interesting inversion. Anybody else? Other numbers? How broken do you think society is? I'm just gonna go around the room. Gus.
Depends on how you're looking at it. Overall, we're gonna go with a good.
9? How about you?
I'd say 7.
7, all right. Victoria?
20.
Oh, you got some interesting stuff going on. All right. Megan?
I'd probably say about 7.
All right.
So I agree, 7.
We're doing like an 8.5.
Wow, all right.
I was thinking, 7, or if I'm really sad, like a 12.
So here are the numbers that you're giving. What are you doing about this? Ooh, right? Now it gets real. Because now, if you know that society is that broken, How are we addressing that? How do you use witchcraft to do that? I think that a lot of people are disenfranchised, meaning that they don't have connection to things. Our original, I mean, and this is, you know, hot meat kettle, but religious institutions, such as the one I'm part of, were a bastion for moral and ethical values, right? But then they got super perverse and super disturbing, and the patriarchy took over and ran rampant, and then a whole bunch of things happened, and then everybody kind of went, wait a minute, we're gonna bounce. And they couldn't be around anymore because it was just too destructive and poisonous for everybody, right? But in a vacuum, now what do we do? Who do you turn to for your morals and values and ethics? I'm not saying turn to me, I'm saying look into yourselves and ask yourselves these questions. Who taught you your morals? Did your parents? Did society? Is it modeled behavior? People don't have that anchor point. They're disenfranchised. They're not connected anymore. I mean, don't even get me started on COVID and all of the things that are disconnected from that. All of us, that's a 10-year track that we're still dealing with from my psych brain. That we have to even accept and acknowledge that the trauma happened. COVID was trauma for everybody in a variety of different ways. And we're just getting to the point where we can not die from it as much, and that we can go, wow, COVID was a bummer, man. That's how far we've gotten. We're not even at the, how do we fix this? We're not at like, how do we get together with people, hugging your loved ones, seeing them consistently? How do we heal from that? The disenfranchisement movement just is a wildfire through all what we're doing. And I would propose that with witchcraft, that you have the opportunity to alter that. All people do, even if it's not witchcraft, but specifically if you're doing things for your community, here's one way to reach out to people, connect people, give them a place, give them those centers, and honor those things, right? Because the reason that things got perverse and super messed up in the church and pretty much every other organization is A, because humans, but also B, that there wasn't a lot of people checking in with everybody else going, hey, how are we doing? Are we really nailing this? And it's like, ooh, no, you're not. Like, we really should have a different conversation. And that's the conversation I want to have here. There's always checks and balances. I can always be overturned in my leadership position. I put the fear of God into myself, pun sort of intended. People in the church can outvote me at any point in time. I can be taken out of leadership at any point in time. If I don't act appropriately to the community and they go, you're not serving the community well, they'll just get rid of me. And so I'm always on pins and needles being like, okay, am I doing this well enough? Am I helping my community enough? Can I take this strong of a stance? Because I'm running the risk of not being involved with a bigger reach to be able to connect to some franchise people. And that's what I would lose if I don't do those things, if I don't hold myself to those things. And it's on everybody involved, whether or not to the church or anything, to establish morality. Stay disciplined to that. Stay ethical with those behaviors. Consistency above almost everything.
So this is a question that I've thought about a lot in my life on how to apply witchcraft or the craft or however you define it, you know, to communities. Like you were saying, like how do I contribute? My one consistent way of contributing is in the mornings when I do my morning rituals and I do my meditations and everything that we've been talking about. I take that energy with me that I have manifested in the morning and then I apply it to the quote, be the reason someone has a better day.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
And I use that, you know, manifestation to be the reason someone has a better day, whether it's smile at someone at a stoplight or something really simple.
Mm-hmm.
That's been my like easiest way to apply witchcraft.
Right.
To everyday life, like, you know, like how do you contribute to community? That's really my way of doing it, is just being someone's smile.
Yep,
Really,
exactly.
that can make all the difference.
Your self-clarity is one of those things. The self-introspection, the introspection that you can do provides you more clarity, which allows you to see more things. And other people who can't see things yet, you can kind of point them and go, hey, look over there, by the way. Like, I've already done this and I'm not in a place where I'm freaking out about a whole bunch of stuff. You can point to stuff at people. Even if you don't understand it, you can go, I looked over here and this worked out pretty well for me. Maybe you could look over there, right? Hence, like witchcraft, right? I'm like, hey, witchcraft worked really well for me and it became my entire existence. Why don't somebody else try it? How else can I do that, right? Being that change that you were talking about too. This is an interesting thing, which is using or partnering with magic to knit together the disenfranchised. Careful distinction in language. Again, this lexicon idea. Do we use magic? Do we partner with magic? What time is this appropriate? things to think about, right? If I'm going to use magic, I'm going to force it into something. I'm going to make it do something. Is that how we want to interact with? Is that how you want to interact with witchcraft? If you do, go for it, right? Not really the way that I want to go about it. I would rather partner with magic because I'm just in this stream of synchronicity and I can just leverage stuff and sort of knit stuff together, you know, the weavers, if you will. You can use things like being artful, stories, occult technologies, etc., to bind and knit together the disenfranchised. If you do tarot or pendulum work, somebody needs a question, it's like, man, I'm having a bad day. Should I get a cup of coffee? Throw down some pendulum work, right? Maybe you need to cast some runes, or maybe just pull a tarot card. For example, there's a deck somewhere in here. There's a deck in my car I keep with me all the time, right? And sometimes, Yeva specifically, I did a reading for her. She felt lost, and I was just like, you need a reading. And so I just did it, and it was the right time for that. So you carry these tools with you, you can use them. Help you knit together disenfranchised people. The question becomes, what is it that you're going to craft? Craft being something that you build and create. So what are you going to craft for the rest of your community? How are you going to assist your community? In what ways can you do that? If you clear yourself, you are going to be a lot more available for other people. I have an excess of resources in certain areas, which allows me to do other things. And I use those resources and leverage them in such a way to assist my community. Everybody has different resources. I'm not saying it just takes like enormous money. I mean, if you're just walking down the street and you smile at somebody at a stoplight and it helps, then congratulations, it's free, right? Spell doesn't cost you anything. You can get as elaborate and crazy as you want. But I had a person that was asking me, I need to celebrate the full moon. I don't have my altar. What am I going to do? I'm like, do you have a lighter? And they said, yeah. I was like, do you have a tea light? And they said, yeah. I'm like, great. Light the candle, stare at the moon, go, thanks, blow it out, you're done. I'm like, wow, that was way less complicated than I thought it was going to be. I was like, you don't need it to be super complicated. That's what you have, then work with what you got. It doesn't have to be super crazy expensive or elaborate. And anyways, I think the smaller things, those day-to-day interactions, those day-to-day choices that each one of you goes out and makes, that artfulness choice that you make, the grace with which you enact your life, those are the small things, are even greater and will create more of those change. That you want to see in your own community. Maybe you don't want to see your community thrive, and you just want to destroy the whole thing. Like, I guess go for it, but like, I think it's going to be kind of difficult because I don't think a lot of people are going to get on board with that.
Well, and one thing that I would say, because I know that when I very first started, because I was lucky enough to find kind of a really early precursor to the Colorado Springs pagan, like one of the pagan groups.
Mm-hmm.
Was that I wasn't able to do much, like to what I felt like to help the community. And what I realized was the best thing that I could do for the community is help myself first.
Exactly.
In like getting myself healthy, like mentally healthy, so that then I could help other people.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of times, especially if you're a naturally overly helpful person, you end up tapping yourself out so hard.
Gas, shock, I'm surprised.
It's like just full of things like this. But you end up so out of, you know, your spoons, or your, you know, pouring from an empty cup kind of thing. And then you end up with nothing spiritually, and then you get angry at everyone for not giving you something.
Right. Good
And because you have been giving. And so I think that sometimes the best thing that you can do for your community is get your own shit together.
Don't overextend. Yeah.
But
It's a good point.
that would be something that, you know, to think of for yourself.
Absolutely. My last point that I had was, so we know that witches are those who knew things and could heal things, whether that's mental slights, physical slights, both. The question is that overall you have to ask yourself is that, do you heed this call to a graceless society? You're going to be working in doing witchcraft, solving or addressing, not even solving, just addressing these problems, are, like you said, exhausting. And they're going to take things away from you. And do you heed the call to help the, work in that disenfranchised space, knowing that it's going to be a lot of nonsense, and it's gonna be a big push, being Sisyphean. You keep pushing a boulder up a hill, and you're gonna do it forever. There's a lot of that. But the more of us that are doing that, the more of us that are thinking along those lines, the better that's going to get, because at least even if one of you does this stuff, or has some approach to this, you know that there's at least me, there's at least one other person that is doing this exact same thing with witchcraft. And you know that at least there's one other. And there's likely far more in this room, and far more that are available that just haven't thought about this yet, or haven't had the connection yet to do so. But there's at least one other person that is trying to solve these things. So I chose to heed that call in a graceless society, knowing that there was likely nothing that I was going to see as a massive change, and that I'm building something for after me. Because I'm not likely to see a massive change where suddenly everybody's gonna be super full of grace and super artful, and that's just unreasonable. And I know that, and I have just accepted that's how it's going to be, and I'm okay with that. But to your point, Megan, run out of spoons, man. Sometimes I have to go sit in the dark with a candle and just be like, I cannot right now. I cannot function. And that's okay too, because that is some of the repair that you have to do when you're dealing with such a monumental, basically undoable task. But answer that question, do you heed the call in a graceless society? I'll leave you guys with that, because they're gonna close the library, and as much as I would love to live here, I don't think they want us living here. So I have to clean up.
I've tried.
But thank you. Does anybody have any thoughts or want to share anything else?
I just want to thank you for doing this.
Thank
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here and supporting. We'll see how many people yell at me on Facebook and say, we couldn't find you. I'll be like, bro.
Ask the librarians.
Right? Or read the post that I put on the Church of Witchcraft Facebook page.
You had the library as the picture.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean they'll find it. I do need to stack all the chairs. If you would like to help me with that, would be great. Thank you again. If you want to, it's not required. Donations are always helpful. Go to the website. All your choice.
Very good. This is not her first